Okay, so I would like to welcome everybody to tonight's presentation. Again, I thank everyone for attending. During tonight's presentation, if anyone has questions related to the presentation or any other type of question that you might have, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, the chat function. You will be able to monitor those. Towards the Q&A portion of the evening, what I'll do is I can feed those questions then to Pete and see if he can answer any of your questions that you might have. This is, again, one of many events hosted during the month of October in conjunction to the Adams County Reads One book. This year, we would like to thank both James and Kathy Gardner and the WellSpan Health for making this program possible tonight. We appreciate their committed support in helping make this and other programs possible throughout the year. So without them, a lot of these programs could not be possible. So we do thank them for their support. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the Adams County Library System. And although the way we access and use information has completely transformed during that time, and especially this year with all of the COVID issues and going digital, the mission still remains the same, and that is to provide residents with materials and information, services for formal and lifelong learning, enrichment, and pleasure. Adams County Reads One Book is an annual program. It was hosted by ACLS that began in 2011. The community-wide One Book originates and has its roots back in 1998 when Seattle, Washington hosted the first one. And since then, many communities have taken on that initiative to provide these type of programs. It is our hope that the Adams County Reads One Book will encourage individuals across Adams County to connect through a shared reading experience and to explore local, regional, and recreational activities as a method of lifelong learning. This year's book selection is The Woman Who Smashed Codes, a true story of love, spies, and the unlikely heroine who outwitted America's enemies by Jason Fagone. Just briefly, I know many of you have probably read the book. For those that have not, we do recommend getting yourself on a hold list or trying to check out a copy. I know there's quite a few of them in the system, so do try to get a hold of one if you have not already read it. In The Woman Who Smashed Codes, Jason Fagone chronicles the extraordinary life of Elizabeth Friedman, who played an integral role in our nation's history for 40 years. After World War I, Smith used her talents to catch gangsters and smugglers during Prohibition, then accepted a covert mission to discover and expose Nazi spy rings across South America. As World War II raged, Elizabeth fought a highly classified battle of wits against Hitler's Reich, cracking multiple versions of the Enigma and a machine used by German spies. Jason Fagone unveils America's code-breaking history through the prism of Smith's life, bringing into focus the unforgettable events and colorful personalities that would help shape modern intelligence. So with that focus of cryptology, code breaking, we thought we'd kind of go back tonight in history to the era of the American Civil War. And we have the special guest, Pete Miele, Executive Director of Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, to host this informal presentation related to Civil War codes and ciphers. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Pete Miele, and I'll turn over the presentation to him.
Okay, thanks. You can hear me, right? Thumbs up, Steve? Good. Well, thank you again to Steve and Jess and everyone at the library. Of course, this is not what we expected this presentation to be, but I am really happy to be able to be here again. I presented last year about opioid use in the Civil War, and I'm really happy to be able to be back and to talk about this subject. I'm broadcasting from the museum this evening, our brand new education center that has just opened, soft open this year, the Lydia Ziegler Clare Education Center, named after the 13-year-old girl who lived in the building with her family in this space during the Battle of Gettysburg. So it's really great to be able to use the technology that we have here to present to those of you far and wide. And the camera is above the screen, so I'm going to try to look at the camera but you might catch me looking down at the feed on the monitor in front of me. I am going to try to build some interactivity into this presentation. Of course, not as much interactivity as we would have gotten had we been together this evening, but there's a couple of points where I might ask for a little feedback. So again, put it in the chat feature. I am looking, have the chat feature up here on the screen. So if you want to chime in, please do chime in. And with that, we are going to get started. And I'm going to hopefully share my screen. Okay. So I actually want to start off with a story this evening. And I want to take you back to December 21st, 1863 in New York City. And this letter is intercepted by the United States Postmaster in New York City, a man named Abram Wakefield, a staunch Union man. And this letter is on its way to Canada from the Confederate States. Of course, it's really difficult to decipher. The letter makes its way to the Secretary of War in Washington, D.C., Edwin Stanton, and from there it makes its way to the cipher operators at the War Department, in the telegraph room at the War Department. You can see there's some musical notes in there. There's Roman, Greek, Indian, telegraphic signs, you name it, it's in this. And these young telegraph operators who were well-versed in the United States cipher spend about 4 hours poring over this document, trying to make sense of it. It was doubtless, it was later written, it was doubtless that this was portentous treason. Well, as they go through it, they get hooked on this line. And they get hooked on this line because of the phrase reaches you, the only thing in that document that is written in English. And they start to think, these young cipher operators, about what the words before it could mean. And they latch on to the two, for lack of a better word, words that are highlighted there and red, and realize that most likely the 10 letters that precede reaches you are the words before and this, before having 6, this having 4. And with that, they are able to decipher this document using contextual clues and working backwards from the words before this. Eventually, they discover that this document is about the shipping of machinery and arms to Canada to aid the Confederate cause. U.S. Marshals are able to apprehend the persons that this letter was intended for, recover millions of dollars worth of Confederate money, bonds and notes and machinery. And thankfully to these telegraph operators, for their hard work, they are awarded an extra $25 a month in salary. So my interest in codes and ciphers really has to do with how people respond and adapt to the world around them, and how do they overcome challenges. And what we're going to talk about tonight fits squarely into that idea of overcoming challenges and adapting to the world. And the Civil War as a whole, I've realized in my time working with the Civil War provides this fantastic laboratory for examining the quick move towards what I like to call the necessities of war. What did they need? What did people need to have this war be a successful win for the Union? What is the Confederacy putting together? These necessities, and also that other stuff of war. You know, we think about war primarily as battles, the actions that are taking place out on the battlefield. But what are the stuff that makes the armies work and run and move? Organization, logistics, medicine, transportation, and communication. And that's what we're going to talk about this evening. At the core of what we're going to talk about this evening, is communication. And understanding and making sense of documents, of situations, and we're going to add to that age-old question, made a little complexity to that question. What factors influence battlefield decisions? And we're going to talk about two primary vehicles in the Army, two primary areas of the Army that are as intertwined as a piece of telegraph wire: the United States Military Telegraph and the United States Signal Corps in the Civil War. So just some simple definitions here so we know what we're talking about this evening. And I am by no means a cryptologist or a student of cryptology, but basic, just to sort of understand what we're going to be talking about this evening. Codes replace words. So that would be like using a code word. The president might be code word Eagle. He has a Secret Service code name. Just one word replacing another. Ciphers are a little bit more complex, in fact, a lot more complex. They replace the letters or groups of letters or words by use of an algorithm, something that can be shared among other people and put into a cipher and then taken back out of the cipher. So if you think, an easy way to think, Morse code is in fact a cipher, not a code, because we are taking letters and transforming them into individual dots and dashes. It gets sent over the wire, and then the person on the other end is going to decipher it, turn it from those dots and dashes back into letters that can be read. So the Civil War is going to be the first use of these two new communications, what I'm calling communication systems, the telegraph and the signal corps. It's not the birth of these systems. Both had been around. The telegraph is around since the 1830s. The signal corps, the use of flags to send messages, had been around or had been invented in the decade preceding the Civil War. But this is the first time that these two systems are going to be used for warfare. And as the communication is being sent using these two systems, naturally there's going to need to be some form of security to make sure that the messages that are sent through these two mediums do not fall into the wrong hands. So, wartime communication. Why is it important? How does it change? Well, up to this point, really, that communication between armies had happened at the same speed as, essentially, as Julius Caesar. Messages are being sent by person, by voice. They're going to be traveling as fast as a human or a horse can carry them. There are some exceptions to that, maybe smoke signals, lights. But by and large, you want to get a message to a body of troops or back to your government. Up to this point, it's being done horseback, letters, and think about the Revolutionary War. And as armies grow much more complex and larger, there starts to, of course, be this need for more and more effective communication. And just by contrast, by example here, the Continental Army at the Battle of Brandywine during the Revolutionary War, there were about 14,000 men on the Continental side. Now that might seem like a lot, but here at Gettysburg, you have 90,000 men just on the Federal side. So again, layers of complexity that need to be dealt with, need to be managed through effective communication. So let's talk a little bit about the telegraph. The Morse telegraph is patented in 1837. It's the first time, the Civil War is the first time it's going to be used at the tactical level, used to call for supplies, reinforcements, change tactics, influence strategy. It had been used a little bit in the Crimean War in the 1850s, but by and large, it's not used as a fine-grained level as it's going to be used in the Civil War. By the end of the Civil War, there are going to be over 15,000 miles of telegraph line laid at a cost of over $3 million in 1865 money, $51 million today, just during the Civil War. The Signal Corps, which you can see there on the right side of your screen, is a group at a signal camp in Georgetown, right outside Washington, D.C., is a much more recent 1850s invention by a guy named Albert Meyer. We'll talk about him in a second. But it's the use of flags, and flag movements correspond to different letters of the alphabet and can send messages by getting up really high, like on this building. The Seminary building was used as a signal station on July 1st, 1863. We'll talk about that in a bit. You can send messages for 10, 15, maybe even 20 miles. So that is just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. So let's jump through to ciphers. So ciphers during the Civil War, again, as all this communication is going around, speeding around, we're going to need some use for security, some need for security. And there are some very basic ciphers. And Abraham Lincoln here in 1865 uses a very basic cipher. And does anybody maybe want to guess just how to decipher this? I'm going to see if maybe I can see the, let's see. I'm going to try to see if I can see the chat without stopping the share. I don't know if I can do that. Oh, there we go. Whoops. Let's go back one here. Well, anyway, A Lincoln in its fume, A in him to start, I army treating. The way to decipher this, again, very basic, read it backwards and phonetically. This morning, Grant reports Petersburg evacuated and is confident, and he is confident, Richmond also. He is pushing forward to cut off, if possible, their retreating army. I start to him in a few minutes, A. Lincoln. So probably not too difficult to crack this code, but even Abraham Lincoln gets in on the action and tries to put something into cipher. So the first person that I want to focus on here is Albert Meyer. And one of the things that I really like doing when I think about the Civil War is thinking about the individuals, those sort of unsung heroes that really make the war run, make the governments run, make the different parts of the army run. And Albert Meyer is up there with that group of people. He's not a field commander. He's not going to get a lot of publicity, but it's because of some of his achievements that they are able to, the Union Army is able to communicate. And this holds true for men like Herman Haupt, who's the railroad czar of the Union Army, William Hammond, the Surgeon General, these guys that you don't really hear of, but the war wouldn't have been able to go on without them. So Albert Meyer here is going to be the inventor of the wigwag signaling system that the Union Army is going to use. He's born in 1827 in Newburgh, New York. He starts off his career as a telegraph operator. So he's very used to this idea of using cipher, of using, putting words into a different method and then deciphering them. And he eventually goes to medical school. And his thesis is a language for deaf mutes. And the way that he what he does is he comes up with a system of taps on the cheek that correspond to letters, and so able to deaf mutes and people are able to understand. So he starts from a very young age in this idea of ciphering and deciphering. So he joins the Army after medical school. He joins the Army as an assistant surgeon and is sent out to Texas. And it's there probably that he becomes really interested in this idea of communication, and comes up. You'll see there on the right, there's an illustration from a book, The History of the Signal Corps, of using flags, and we're talking about really, really tall, big flags, 6 by 6 foot flags on a 6 foot pole, can be seen from great distances with very powerful telescopes. And the movement of the flag, as you see there, corresponds with a letter. And I did not put, but if anybody wants it, I can share it. I did not put the actual code or the cipher in the presentation. I thought that would be a little too much. So he comes up with this when he's out west, and it's really unknown for sure how he comes up with this. But one of the theories that's put forth by people that have studied the Signal Corps is that he witnesses Native Americans signaling to each other from one hill to another, and that he gets this in his mind, and that's where this idea is born. He takes it to the War Department. They're kind of not really enthusiastic about it. The Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis, in the 1850s, doesn't think that there's a lot to it, but they keep him in mind. And by 1859, Albert Meyer gets a second chance, and he goes before a board of inquiry that's headed by none other than Robert E. Lee. And Lee and the board that he oversees decides to give Meyer a chance. And Meyer is able to put this system, to perfect this system, and he starts testing it in 1860 and 1861. He actually applies and receives a patent for his wigwag signaling system. And by the start of the Civil War, he has a camp of instruction at Georgetown, right outside D.C. That picture that was in the earlier slide are the men that are at this camp of instruction. But what's happening is he's drawing men from all over the Army, from different regiments that have come and want to learn the system. And just as easily as he can get them, they can be taken back to their regiments. So you have this sort of transient group of men that know this method. But March 1863, finally, March 1863, Abraham Lincoln signs the Signal Corps into a separate branch of the Army. So just 4 months before the Battle of Gettysburg, you have an official Signal Corps. And we'll talk a little bit later about how the Signal Corps is used here at Gettysburg. So, as you could imagine, if you're up really high and you're signaling with these flags, just as easily the Confederates could see what they're signaling. So Meyer comes up with a cipher disk. It's adopted in 1863, and really it looks like something that you would get out of a cereal box. In fact, people here may have had something like this out of a cereal box. The picture on the left is from a History of the Signal Corps book available on Internet Archive. The picture on the right is an actual cipher in the collection of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and that's held there by their curator. So what you would do is the numbers correspond to movements of the flag, left or right. And Meyer suggested that in using this signal cipher disk, that there would be frequent changes in an unusual sequence. And what you would do is you would communicate before trying to send messages, probably communicate by a dispatch, and that you would move and synchronize your cipher disks and send the messages, and then you could frequently change the code. So R might be 2112. Well, you could just easily turn that, and R could then be 2221, and that would change the sequence of movements of the flag and hopefully keep the enemy in confusion. We know that the cipher disk was in use during the Chancellorsville campaign. So one of the things that's been hard in doing the research for this presentation is really fully knowing and understanding what is sent in cipher and what is not, because the dispatches that you find in something like the official records of the War of the Rebellion don't necessarily say, well, this was written in cipher, this was not written in cipher. So you kind of got to see what messages are being sent, what they're saying within those messages, or what diaries are being kept by the cipher operators that give some indication as to what is being sent and what is not being sent in cipher. Well, of course, as I said earlier, we know that they're being used at the Chancellorsville campaign because there is a disagreement, a dispute between John Sedgwick's 6th Corps of the Army of the Potomac and Army headquarters. Because Sedgwick says that he receives an order from the Chief of Staff at Army headquarters, Daniel Butterfield, to not use signals, as the enemy can read them. And headquarters says, well, use your cipher to send important messages. Tell Sedgwick to use the cipher to send important messages. And it's unclear why there's this communication, because a subsequent dispatch says, well, we were using ciphers the entire time. So there's some confusion about how these are being used, how effective they are. And this order, this kind of confusion, seems to undermine some confidence in the signal system. We don't know from the Confederate side if they understood what was going on during the Chancellorsville campaign. I had not been able to find anything where they write about this, but there is some back and forth about whether or not they are actually effectively using the cipher during this campaign. Let's see if there are any. I'm going to open the chat for a moment here, if I can. Can't access it. Okay. So let's move on to the second part of this, or the second group, the United States Military Telegraph. And we're going to start with this man named Anson Stager. And Anson Stager is 36 years old in 1861 as the war breaks out. And he had come of age as the Morse telegraph is being perfected and patented. And the way that I like to think of it is, just like today, you want a younger person teaching you, or younger people understanding the iPhones or social media. It's just the same. He was coming of age as this was becoming a new process. So he understands it and masters it pretty well. He works on telegraph lines starting in 1846, rises to the superintendent of the Western Union Telegraph Office. According to a history of the military telegraph, quote, in his day at the key, none excelled him either in precision or rapidity. So naturally, as the Civil War breaks out, this man is in very high demand. And he's living in Ohio at the time. And he's called upon by the governor of Ohio to develop a cipher system so Governor Dennison can communicate with the governors of Indiana and Illinois without it being intercepted by Confederate forces. Eventually, Stager goes on to get on the radar of George McClellan, who is leading, at this time, early in the war, leading Union troops in Ohio, living in Cincinnati. He goes and meets with McClellan at his home, at McClellan's home in Cincinnati, and is called upon to develop a cipher system for use of the Army. And I'm only going to show this evening that really the most basic, the initial cipher system that Steger comes up with. Now, everything that happens for the entire war is a basic variation on this same system, but the first incarnation of it is the easiest to explain. So here is a message in cipher. Telegraph, thee have, be not, I hands profane, right, hired, held. Can't read it, right? Well, let's look at the system for deciphering it. I know this might be confusing, so stay with me for a moment. So what we have here is what's called the six-column cipher. And what is going to happen is you're going to take this document and write out all of the words in 6 columns. In fact, it's really 7 columns. But just to make things interesting, all of the words in that 7th column are thrown in there for confusion. So we're going to write 6 words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, throw out the 7th word, start again, write, hired, held, throw out the 14th word, and then keep going, going, going. The word telegraph at the beginning also gets thrown out because this is a word that tells you how many rows there are going to be. And if we look over here, telegraph, 8 rows. So now we have this laid out like this. Still doesn't make any sense, right? Well, the last part to deciphering this is that there is a preset way to read up and down the columns. And this preset way of reading up and down the columns, initially it would be verbal, but as the war goes on, there starts to be other words embedded within the document that tells you the path. So what I mean by that is the way that we would read this is start up the 6th column, down the 1st column, up the 5th. So now we can read it a little bit better. Sir, my past reputation demands at my hands the right to ascertain the state of the advance. Colonel Crittenden not desiring to start, I have hired an engine to go up the road, since being superseded by Colonel Crittenden must not be held responsible for the success of this division. And that's how we decipher the message. Now, as I said earlier, as the war goes on, the ciphers get more and more intricate, and they have to be changed in case when they may be captured by the enemy. So there are these books, and they're all digitized. I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. Cipher for telegraphic correspondence, military operations, and for important government dispatches. Anson Steger, General Manager, U.S. Military Telegraphs. So within these books, and I'll show you on the next page a little bit more, everything about how to decipher these messages. As time goes on, they are replacing common words with all sorts of what they call arbitrary words. And female names corresponded to time. So instead of writing 1:30 a.m., you would write Agnes. 2:30 p.m. becomes Henrietta. And the communication would be sent from cipher operator to cipher operator. The operator on the opposite end would have this book, would be able to go through and decipher it. You also have in these books, instead of saying the President of the United States or the Secretary of State or the Secretary of War, Treasury, so on and so forth, you would either say Adam or Asia to mean the President, Abel or Austria to mean the Secretary of State. So again, just adding more and more complexity to confuse the enemy. Here on this page on the right, you see some of the routes, the paths. Up at the top there, you'll see 6 route, up the 4th column, down the 3rd, up the 2nd, down the 1st, up the 5th, down the 6th. Going back to what we said about how to read it up and down and up and down. So really intricate, changed pretty frequently. I think that, I forget, but there are somewhere 12 or 14 different ciphers that are used in the 4 years between 1861 and 1865. I know of 2 instances that I found in doing the research for this where ciphers are abandoned or changed as the cipher books are captured by the Confederates. I don't think that I put it on here, but there were some of these digitized books that I found that had the names of the people who had the ciphers. So they're keeping really close track of who had these and how many were out there. So if one got misplaced or one got captured, you'd know to be able to change it. Uses and impact. So what do the Confederates think about this? So the Confederates do capture messages in cipher. They are unable to break it. There are some instances where the Confederacy, the Confederate Army, will publish the letters or the dispatches in the paper and newspapers, asking for any help that they can get, if people can help them to decipher these messages. But they never are able to effectively crack the federal cipher. The Confederates are never successful doing it. And at the same time, no federal cipher operator ever changed sides or gave up the cipher to the Confederates. So you had a very, very tight ship being run here in the U.S. military telegraph. The other thing that I want to talk about just briefly is where these two functions intersected, that U.S. military telegraph with the Signal Corps, comes into play with something called the flying telegraph, which you start to see around the midpoint in the war, where these really sort of mobile telegraph units, where the string could be run out, the wire could be run out between different points of the Army, and then moved pretty quickly. So we're not going to lay out a permanent line, but to lay out a temporary line between two corps or headquarters and another corps or headquarters and Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, with new technology, it sometimes works. It's really unreliable, very unreliable at longer distances. And the Signal Corps operators, those flagmen, are not trained in using a telegraph. And Albert Meyer, to his discredit, doesn't want to give his flying telegraph up to Anson Steger and the United States military telegraph. Eventually, this makes it to the War Department. As you see a lot of times in the Civil War, there's a big personality headbutt, and unfortunately, Albert Meyer loses. And the U.S. military telegraph wins, takes over the use of the flying telegraph, and basically disbands it. Doesn't really use it that much in the war by this point. By the time that this big headbutt happens, the war is almost over. But On June 30th, 1863, the day before the Battle of Gettysburg starts, there are 5 flying telegraphs that are being used in the Union Army, in the Army of the Potomac. So we know that they were using them on the way up to here, to Gettysburg. To what extent they were using them and to what end they were using them is pretty unknown. So let's get into the Battle of Gettysburg. How do we see the Signal Corps and the United States military telegraph playing out during the most important battle of the Civil War, the battle that we are all very much aware of? And we're looking here on the left at Aaron Jerome, who is a first lieutenant signal officer that is traveling with John Buford's Cavalry Corps. And then on the right, we're looking at United States Signal Corps stations on the Gettysburg battlefield. And we'll talk about both of those in just a second. So let's backtrack just a moment, though, and talk about getting up to Gettysburg, because the Civil War, the Gettysburg campaign actually begins along the Rappahannock River in Virginia on June 3rd, 1863, when the Confederates begin to move towards the Shenandoah Valley to come north into Pennsylvania. And around June 10th, a big battle is fought at an area called Brandy Station, the largest cavalry battle ever fought during the Civil War. And part of what's going on during the Battle of Brandy Station is the Union cavalry is trying to figure out what the Confederate intentions are. What are the Confederates actually doing? Are they moving north? And according to one history of the United States military telegraph, quote, from Rappahannock Station, during the Battle of Brandy Station, Alfred Pleasonton, the United States Cavalry Command, telegraphed General Joseph Hooker authentic and highly important information of the concentration of large bodies of infantry and cavalry. Operator Emmerich, working with Pleasonton, wrote in his diary, "Plenty of cipher work." So as Pleasonton and Emmerich are sending this information on the Confederates back to Joseph Hooker, commander of the Army of the Potomac, they are definitely putting it into cipher to keep it out of the wrong hands. At the same time, the telegraph is being used to try to communicate the emergency of the Confederate invasion to northern governors all over the northern states, to try to raise more men and get them to south central Pennsylvania to help stem the tide of Confederates that are coming this way. Andrew Curtin in Harrisburg is trying to raise emergency troops. Governor of New York is raising militia to send down here. So the telegraph lines are hot in the weeks leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg. We're not quite sure if there's cipher being used for that. Likely not. But the communication is going forth. On the eve of the battle, not quite the eve, but on June 28th, an extraordinarily important message is sent in cipher from Army headquarters, Army of the Potomac headquarters, to Washington, D.C. And this is George Meade accepting command of the Army of the Potomac, replacing Joseph Hooker. And this is a move that Lincoln had made. Lincoln sends an individual to Meade to offer him command, but Meade's answer back to Abraham Lincoln is going to be sent via telegraph. And here's the story, here's the quote from the history of the United States military telegraph. While Chandler, who's the telegraph operator, was translating this cipher message, the president was looking over his shoulder, watching with great interest the words as Chandler deciphered them, and seemed to feel great relief when he knew that Meade was in command. As the first wave of Confederates comes through Gettysburg on June 26th, and then heads out towards York and Wrightsville on June 27th and 28th, the men of Jubal Early's division, these Confederates, are cutting the telegraph line that runs along the railroad, the railroad that runs along Route 30 today. They're ripping up the railroad. They're cutting down the telegraph. So Gettysburg, the citizens of Gettysburg are effectively cut off from the rest of the world during the battle. And maybe even more crucial, the army, George Meade's army, as they come up here to Gettysburg, does not have telegraphic communication with the outside world. Even after the battle, the communication has not been reestablished to Gettysburg. So there are no messages getting in and out except by horseback. And the line is repaired from Hanover to Gettysburg following the battle. And there's a really, really great quote here that talks about how they repair this line from Hanover to Gettysburg to reestablish communication with the outside world right after the battle. The repairers using for the purpose scraps of stovepipe and odd pieces of wire. They were fastened to the necks of old bottles that were placed in the crotches of trees, where they were held and insulated the wire. The bridge had been burned, so the bridge over Rock Creek along Route 30, right behind the Lucky Truck and Gettysburg Rental Center, there's a railroad bridge there that's burned by the Confederates on June 26th. And the telegraph wire is cut, and when they try to put it back together, it won't reach across Rock Creek. In hunting about, they discovered in the stream some old soda bottles and an iron rail. The latter was propped up so as to rest on the bottles, and the ends of the line connected with those of the rail. Thus, communication first established between Gettysburg and the North. There was probably around July 7th. So let's go back to the Signal Corps here and talk about what is going on during the battle with the United States Signal Corps and the role that they play. And Aaron Jerome, as we talked about there on the right, on the left, very important to the story that we tell here at Seminary Ridge Museum. Jerome is traveling with John Buford, who is the first Army officer, cavalry officer from the United States Army that makes it here to Gettysburg on the evening of June 30th. And as Buford comes up into town, he sees the Confederates off around on Route 30, today Route 30, the Chambersburg Pike, pulling back out of town. And Buford knows that there's a huge Confederate force out towards the mountains, out towards Cashtown. And he sends Aaron Jerome to seek out the most prominent point, to watch for campfires, and in the morning, look for dust. And where does he go? He comes to this building, goes up to the cupola. And on the night of June 30th and throughout the morning on July 1st, Jerome is looking out towards the west with his very powerful spyglass, watching the movements of the Confederate Army. At this point, he does not have anybody with whom to communicate. There are no other Union forces here. And so throughout the day, he's watching, he's giving messages to Buford through dispatch. Buford's coming up to the cupola, and John Reynolds is getting information from Jerome. And probably sometime in the mid-afternoon, Aaron Jerome starts using the signal station, the cupola, to begin communicating as the 11th Corps under Oliver Howard has come up from the south, and a signal station is established up on Cemetery Hill. And we know that, and it probably is in Cipher, that Jerome sends a message to Oliver Howard saying, the enemy are approaching on our right. There is nothing but cavalry to oppose them. And these are the Confederate forces that are coming from Oak Hill. The Signal Corps is going to play a crucial role, of course, on July 2nd, probably the most crucial role, definitely the most crucial role that it plays here at the Battle of Gettysburg, but possibly the most crucial role that the Signal Corps plays anywhere, as a signal station is set up on Little Round Top. And During the day, the signal officers on Little Round Top observe the Confederates under James Longstreet marching out to the west and south, attempting to make a flank march on the Union forces. And they're able to get communication to George Meade and Gouverneur Warren in time and set up a defense of Little Round Top just in the nick of time. Had they been late, the Confederate forces would have taken Little Round Top and possibly unhinged the Union line. Also, on July 3rd, they're continuing, the Union Signal Corps is continuing to communicate from different points in the field. I believe that this map that you'll see here on the right is signal stations on the 3rd. So you'll see the numbers 5, 2, 4, 6, 3, going around that fish hook. Meade is able to keep in constant communication with the different parts of his army very quickly during the battle. What once might have taken a rider, a dispatch rider, and they're still using them, but a long time to get from place to place, now can be sent in a matter of minutes using a flag. And on July 3rd, during the barrage, artillery barrage that precedes Pickett's charge, Meade leaves his headquarters on the back slope of Cemetery Ridge, but refuses to leave until a signal station is set up where he is going to go on Powers Hill, so he can continue to communicate with the army, the rest of the army. Here's a cipher letter that I found during the Battle of Gettysburg. This is between George Meade and Darius Couch, who is leading the defenses of Pennsylvania. He's up in Harrisburg. And this letter was discovered by an intern to Gettysburg National Military Park a couple of years ago and deciphered by one of the law enforcement officers for the park. And you can see it's the same thing that we saw earlier. 30th in advancing, hold between 3 my northern well speed trains. Wise, the word wise here is the indicator, that cipher word that tells you how many rows are going to be used. Senate, this is deciphered. June 30th, 11 a.m. for General Couch. I'm in position between Emmitsburg and Westminster, advancing upon the enemy. The enemy hold AP Hill, Cashtown Pass between Gettysburg and Chambersburg. Their cavalry 3 to 5 brigades are on my right between me and the North Central, and it goes on and on. So basically, this is Meade giving Darius Couch a situation report on the eve of battle. So as we close, I want to show this, and I hope that this works. I didn't test this link on this machine. Okay. But as I was doing research for this presentation, I discovered the Huntington Library out in California has a whole slew of these. Let's see, because you might not be able to see that. Let me show this. Okay. So the Huntington Library has a whole bunch of these ledgers and cipher books, and those images that I got of those cipher books earlier in the presentation come from this. And they crowdsourced a project back in I think it was 2015, 2016, to try to get people to transcribe these documents that they had found. And it was all volunteer, and you can see down here, 5,830 volunteers helped to transcribe and decipher these documents, and now this is all available online for you to see. So if anybody is really interested in looking through this, you can go through here and find the ciphers, find the messages. So it's interesting that this is still something that was getting a lot of attention today, or at least getting a lot of attention back just a couple of years ago. The Gettysburg message that I saw was deciphered in 2014. Huntington Library Project, I have here in my notes, is 2016. So pretty interesting that it is still going on and that all of this stuff is digitized. I did not set, I probably shouldn't say this to the library people, but I didn't set foot in a library to do this. I did it all online because the information is out there. So I hope you enjoyed this visit to the interesting depths of the United States Civil War, the little aspects that make a difference, that are born out of necessity, but rarely talked about. And I really hope that this helped to illuminate some of those darker corners of the Civil War. So let me stop my screen share and we'll see if we have any
Thanks, Pete,
questions. Thank you
for that presentation. I think we did have one question during that. I'm not sure if you can see the chat field, but one of the questions diverting back to the cipher and the way the columns work.
Yeah.
They asked, how did they communicate the change in path for how to read the columns up or down?
Yeah, so early on, it looks like it was done verbally, that somebody would be told that the columns were going to be changed, maybe when the message was delivered, how to read up and down. But the cipher books would be issued to different cipher operators as the change was taking place. I'm not exactly sure the mechanics of how the books were issued to different people. And then words embedded within the document would indicate to the coder and the decoder, the cipher and the decipherer, how to read them and how they would be read up, down, otherwise. I hope that answered your question. I'm not exactly, like I said, I'm not exactly sure of the mechanics of the distribution of the books. That's an interesting question. Can you put the website for the ciphers in California again? Yes. Let me see. It's at the Huntington Library, the Thomas Eckert papers. And I am going to copy, paste, and put it in the chat.
If anyone has any questions at this time, you can use the chat feature in the Zoom to ask Pete any questions that you have related to Civil War Code, ciphers, the museum.
Walter asked, did the telegraphers keep logbooks? Yes, they did. In fact, that's a lot of what we're going to see are the ledgers. A lot of the stuff that the Huntington, and I'm going to just try to share my screen one more time. What they have at the Huntington in this Thomas Eckert collection is both the cipher books and the ledgers. And what I'm showing right here are the ledgers. Cipher telegrams received at the War Department, telegrams received Major Eckert, cipher messages sent. So these are the logs of what goes in and out. And then if we go back for a moment here, you can see there's another whole section that are just the code books. And these are small, sort of like pocket size cipher books. And it's really cool what they did. You can see the entire thing. This is cipher number 5. I believe that this is the person, the cipher operator who had it in 1865. Again, you see the times in there corresponding with females' names. So if anybody is interested in this stuff, it's all out there. It's all free, and it's all pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, this is very fascinating. The fact that, a lot of this is being digitized now online, where you can just click on the mouse, you can access all of this information. especially in this digital age. It's awesome research. I had a question really quick too.
Yeah.
Do you find any kind of difference between the Eastern theater of war compared to the Western theater of war in terms of their abilities? Were they pretty equal, or were there struggles? How did that play out between the two?
Yeah, it seems that it was pretty equal. At least at the early point of the war, there's a lot of, it seems that the ciphers are being almost used more in the Western theater than the Eastern theater. At least that the book that I was reading seems to indicate that. It talks about being the first cipher that's put forth in Ohio that Stager comes up with is used in Western Kentucky and out there. And I don't know if it's because it was harder to keep security in those areas, it's more of a fluid. But there's a lot said about Grant's cipher operator. And I didn't mention this, but I'll mention it now. And this was Grant was in the Western theater. Let me get his name. S.H. Beckworth is Grant's cipher operator, and at one point, coming up with a new code or a new cipher, Beckwith comes up with many important, he notes down proper nouns they want to come up with arbitrary words for, so replacing a proper noun with something that doesn't really make any sense except to the cipher operator. And he keeps down, he takes like notes of like 900 proper nouns that they want to come up with other phrases and words for. So from what I can see, it was pretty equal, and it's maybe even possible that the Western theater had a little bit of an edge. So great question, Steve. One of the last things that I want to say, at least, and I know there's probably going to be more. The book that I was using for a lot of this information is called The Military Telegraph During the Civil War in the United States by a man named William Plum. He's a lawyer in Chicago. It was published in 1882, and it's available on Internet Archive in 2 volumes. So that's where I got the first image that I showed, which was the Confederate letter. That's where I got a lot of the information of just trying to make sense of the ciphers that they were using. So if you want a little bit more, The Military Telegraph During the Civil War in the United States by William Plum.
Okay, I think we also had a question concerning in the question and answers field. What did the South use to send their messages? Was there a difference between the North and the South? What were they using?
Yeah, so they are also using Telegraph. I wasn't able to find too much, and I focused more on the Union for this, but besides the Confederate cipher that I showed at the beginning, I didn't find, but I wasn't really looking for Confederate ciphers. There is sort of a signal corps that the Confederacy has. Again, I'm not exactly sure how effective they are, but Albert Meyer's chief aide early on in his establishment of the Signal Corps is a man named E.P. Alexander, who becomes the Confederate ordnance chief for the Army of Northern Virginia. So sort of interesting. And Alexander's here at Gettysburg, and he was sort of Meyer's protege. But so that I unfortunately don't know all too much about the Confederate cipher system, but it doesn't seem to be as intricate or unbreakable as the Union system.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions for Pete? You can use the chat field. I know some people have been putting it in the Q&A. That's all right. We can do that too. And if Pete has the ability to see it, he'll answer, or I can continue to send that. I think somebody just asked, now that we are at 200 years later, to communicate messages and orders, would the military use sophisticated encryption software, and are there even more advanced techniques?
I don't really, I haven't paid a lot of attention to what's going on now. Maybe somebody, I don't know if anybody else has an idea of what sort of encryption. We're probably not supposed to know what sort of encryption software they're using. But I didn't do any preparation for trying to see what people are using now. So I can't really address that.
Okay, well, if there isn't any other questions, I want to thank you, Pete, for giving a great presentation, kind of informing us on the history of Civil War codes and ciphers, kind of going off, kind of keeping with the topic, of course, with The Woman Who Smashed Codes, the book, kind of diverting from the 20th century and looking at an earlier time period in American history and how that relates and how it all correlates together. So I'd like to, again, thank Pete for hosting this and helping us out with the one read. And I thank all of you for attending. If you're interested in more events, and I'm going to start my video here so that way you can see me. If you are interested in further events for the month, please go to the Adams County Library's website. The calendar events has all of the events that are being hosted. Our branch libraries are hosting several different events throughout the month, so do check those out. You can register online as you did for this event. Just one big mention is next week, Tuesday, October 20th at 6:30 p.m. We're going to have the author, Jason Fagone, with us to talk about his writing of The Woman Who Smashed Codes. So you don't want to miss that. There is still registration available for that. So if you're interested, please go on our website, click the link. You'll get the Zoom email at the end of registration on Tuesday for that event. So if you're interested, please do register. And again, I'd like to thank Pete for helping us out tonight and providing
Can I put in a plug for the museum?
Yeah, go right ahead.
So Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, we are open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday right now from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that's going to be through the end of this month. In November, we're going to be open just Saturdays and Sundays, and then we're going to close down for the winter and focus on digital projects. So please like us on Facebook, visit our website, seminaryridgemuseum.org, or come up and visit us. We're up here on the Seminary campus just west of town in the big brick building that's been here for almost 200 years. So sorry I interrupted you, but I had to get my plug in.
No, definitely. That's great. I wanted you to do that. So we support each other. So yeah, if you have an opportunity to go up there, it's an awesome museum, awesome opportunities to interact with the history. So do take an opportunity to get up there. So again, I would like to thank everyone and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.